Just going to actually talk about the area right behind us here a little bit, the area northwest of Horsetooth Reservoir. Throughout the day, generally the fire has moved east through there, but at this point you can see it's kind of moderated. It appears to be blowing back on itself a little bit, so that's a good thing. And fire behavior can pick back up in the afternoon. Wind conditions can do that, though right now we're getting into that mid-afternoon point where we're doing pretty good at the moment in that area, so that's encouraging. I want to talk a little bit about the northeast corner of the fire, which is up, kind of moving generally in the vicinity of where the Hewlett fire was and towards the Bonner Peak subdivision area. It's not imminently approaching that, but it is moving in that direction. That is, at least earlier, shortly, a little bit ago, was reported as something to the head of the fire. Some concerns about the amount of flame activity and movement up there. We do have a couple of heavy helicopters working on water drops up there, and we're sending additional crews up into that area at this time just because of the concerns we have up there. Another area that we're really just pre-planning at this point, but because the fire, as we mentioned, has had multiple heads and moved in different directions, it's possible that it could also move to the northeast, which is kind of almost what you're seeing the winds doing a little bit now, but not in a real strong fashion. But on the north side of the fire, that raises some preliminary concerns about the Glacier View area, and so we're not requiring any pre-notifications. There's no evacuations. I want to be very clear about that, but internally Fire Command is in the process of just doing some pre-planning in the event the fire moves that way and they require evacuations and additional steps. So they're starting to look at that, work on that, just because the fire is unpredictable, and if it were to move that way, we would need to. Glacier View is a pretty large subdivision that's accessed off of the Red Feather Lakes Road and number of homes back in there. So we're just again starting to look at that. If there's residents up in that area, just be vigilant, be aware, stay connected to the news media, our website, larimersheriff.org, the NC website. They can also call 970-498-5500 if evacuations become necessary, or even just pre-preparations for those. We will certainly send out notifications and get some deputies and other forces up in that area. We're not doing that at this time, but we just want to be as transparent as we can with areas that are a concern at this point. So that is one of those. A little bit of a clarification on Risk Canyon. We reported earlier some concerns about a number of homes that were damaged or destroyed in that area, and that is apparently the case, but I want to be clear that there are also a number of homes that appear to be unburned and undamaged. The fire has moved through pretty quickly, left a number of unburned areas, and has been pretty unpredictable as far as that goes. So as I mentioned at our earlier briefing, we do have assessment teams coming together and starting to get ready to go into those areas and focus on assessing which homes are damaged, to what extent they're damaged, who those belong to, and getting word out to those folks. The reason that's just starting now, and we're really just in the planning and preparation process for that, and expect that to happen over the next couple of days in terms of implementing that plan, is because with the resources on scene, you really need to focus on people, getting people out. You need to focus on protecting houses that are undamaged, going back after the fact while the fire's still very active and uncontained at this point, is something that you don't start right away, but we are starting to look into that because people want to know, there are concerns, and there are specialized teams that focus on that component of it. That's really all I have this afternoon. I could take a couple of questions. Generally what fire operations is telling me is they're making some good progress today. We won't have figures on containment till either late today or early tomorrow as reports are compiled and crews come in off the line, and we see how the rest of the day goes. But progress is being made, and resources are on scene at this point, and we should have, my understanding is, more resources as we go into tomorrow as well. Questions at this point? Yeah.
One of the things that we've heard from homeowners the most is just the frustration of not knowing whether their home is still there or not.
Yeah.
What would you say to them?
Well, one, I understand that frustration. I can't completely understand because I haven't been in that situation, but I can imagine it would be terrible and frustrating to have concerns about your home and your belongings and all that. So that's why the assessment team is being put together at this point, and they're working on that over the next couple days to get that in place and get that information out. We want to do that as quickly as possible. That's why some of this information is kind of piecemeal too, because it's a big fire. It's hard to get eyes on all aspects of it. So when we get reports from our key operators and division supervisors out on the scene, we take bits and pieces of that and get that out when we can through you and through our other direct information sources to those folks. But I understand the concern. Again, because of our priorities, we do have to focus on life safety of those that may be potentially in harm's way as this fire changes and evolves. Structure protection of existing structures. We don't look at who they belong to or anything like that when we go in with the structure protection. Our folks are just on it. They have done some heroic measures to save homes, and in addition to the evacuations, and they have been successful in that in a number of cases. We're hearing lots of reports of homes that have been saved and protected. In one case, one had ignited on fire, and they were able to get it out and protect the majority of the home. There are other cases where entire homes have been protected with perimeters now around them that should hold. Again, that'll be an ongoing process, but there are crews continuing to work on that and monitor that component of it. And then as we go, the next priority, or another priority, is to get that information and compile it and figure out whose home is whose, what the situation is. We know it's frustrating, but we've got to allocate the limited resources we have as effectively as we can.
Nick, a double question.
Yeah, Pamela, go ahead.
Okay. Earlier today, you had talked about possibly letting some people to go into animals.
Yeah.
That happens?
That's happening on a case-by-case basis throughout the day. What those people do is check in at our various checkpoints. Our Sheriff's Operation Command makes an assessment based on the situation as to whether it's appropriate to let those parties in, where they want to go, etc. It's not something we're encouraging or doing on a regular basis, but there have been some cases where that's allowed. I don't know the exact status on that right now, if that's still appropriate or what areas that may be appropriate. If somebody's very near a roadblock, for instance, and there's no visible fire behavior and fire operations confirms it's okay to go in and get some critical medication or something else, those types of things are being accommodated. We're not being totally unreasonable on that. But if somebody wants to go all the way up to the end of the Poudre Canyon to get some possession or something, that, in that case, the answer is typically going to be no if it's an unsafe area. We're not going to jeopardize our personnel. We don't want to jeopardize those people. Once they're out, they need to stay out. But there are some exceptions to that, certainly. Another question over here?
First of all, do you have an updated figure on the acreage, and then do you have any updated information on the cause of the fire?
I do have updated information on the cause of the fire, actually. We have confirmed that lightning is the cause at this point, and we do have that. Containment figures we will not have until evening. They will fly and take an infrared shot at night. They get a better shot at that time, and we should be able to release that in the morning.
Do you have an update on the person who's
Question here there was a question on the person who is unaccounted for. We're still working on that. We anticipate having some information on that as early as this evening at the 8 p.m. briefing, actually. And then there was a question about the towers, the communication towers. That's a good question. That's been a critical component for us. And what I'm hearing from our Larimer County radio folks who've been up on scene is that looks pretty good now. There was fire that came within, it sounds like a few feet of those structures, but they were able to suppress that and stop that at this time. And they've got a kind of a burned out area around it due to fire conditions and the suppression efforts that they put in place up there. So I think we're good. And I can't say 100% that those are protected, but we're in much better shape than we were a day ago.
Are you sticking with about 100 homes or structures have been destroyed in this community?
Well, I want to be clear that that's a very preliminary estimate based on some folks not able to get back into every area, but just kind of cruising through and estimating. But we do think that there are likely that number of homes and or structures. And the firefighters have a very difficult time discerning a garage outbuilding from a small cabin, for instance, if it's been damaged or destroyed. But we think we're probably in that general vicinity if you look at homes and structures. The number could be lower as we get in and assess it. It could also be higher as we get in areas that just have not been accessible at this point. But we wanted to give you some ballpark idea of, unfortunately some homes have been lost and some folks are going to be in a tough situation.
Do you have estimates in any other areas, about structures?
Not at this time.
like days before? Were they monitoring it, or how did that all evolve?
A Forest Service investigator was assigned to that, and so I can't tell you the exact protocol of how they do that, but they did find the point of origin and were able to analyze that, study that, and determine that it looked like a lightning strike. Anything else? Yes?
You didn't really address Poudre Canyon too much
Yeah.
at the beginning of your presentation.
Yeah.
You had one or two people wonder about their homes and even the fire station at Poudre Canyon. Can you say anything?
Yeah, I mean, just very anecdotally, I mean, we do know that there has been some apparent loss of structures in that area. We don't have as much information on to what extent there are homes lost there or not. I think it's a similar situation where a number of homes are fine and largely appear to be intact. Some structures, and they again may not be homes, were burned in that area. We don't think, what I'm hearing again preliminarily in the Poudre Park area, for instance, it doesn't sound like the fire at the point when I was briefed earlier had moved north of 14, and much of that appeared to be in pretty good shape from the preliminary assessments I was getting just a bit earlier here.
Nick, can you give us perspective in terms of the size of this fire here in Larimer County, what it means for the crews on the ground, and really how you guys are doing this? Is 48 hours. This is pretty huge.
Yeah, the question related to the size of the fire and the impact on the resources out here, it's a very tough situation. We don't have 400 or 500 wildland firefighters standing around in Larimer County waiting to go fight a fire. I wish we did, but that's not how the system works. And so you have to pull in resources from other areas, other departments, and that's obviously ramped up pretty quickly. It is hard to believe it's just really a couple days here, but got a small army at this point and more coming. But the folks that have been on the fire since the beginning, it's a tiring prospect. They are required to get a certain amount of rest, but they can often end up working 16-hour days and 8 hours down, sleeping in a tent, and very tough conditions. Temperatures cooled a little bit, but first day, boy, it was hot, and I was glad I wasn't up there on the fire line. I was up in the area, but those folks, men and women both, who are carrying equipment and hiking up in there, and then the deputies who go in with most of which are not trained firefighters and don't have fire gear, and are going in and knocking on doors and asking people to get out while they have visible flames a short distance away. It takes a lot of courage, and I'm just glad that we've had, other than the dehydration, heat stroke type situation with one firefighter, no additional responder injuries at this point reported.
What's the latest numbers of how many firefighters working now and how many you're expecting?
Let me look at that here. Today we had 400 plus or minus. It fluctuates pretty rapidly, and as I recall, the incident commander mentioned earlier that would ramp up by about 100 or so, I think, per day, if I remember right from the earlier briefing. So we may end up with 600 or so in the next 48 hours, plus air, and we've got significant air support at this time. With today we had 5 heavy air tankers. That's a big number assigned, so we're starting to get some additional resources. 5 single-engine air tankers, a couple of heavy helicopters dropping water, a couple of Type 3s. I haven't seen it here, but there is one Army National Guard Black Hawk somewhere on the fire. We expected to. I know at least one arrived today and has been assigned to the fire. So quite a fair amount of resources at this point, and more coming and expected. Any other questions at this point? I don't have a lot of details on that yet. We do have weather specialists at this size incident who are working on that. Their briefing operations command. I didn't get that information in time, but they're looking at that, studying everything from humidity, projected winds, temperatures, precipitation, if any, and those types of factors, but I don't have that information yet. I expect we'll have more detail on that with the morning briefing. What they typically do is at 6 a.m. brief in everybody on the situation going forward for that operational period. You had a question here?
Does it seem like it's inevitable to come into West Fort Collins? I mean, I know it's burning right on the bridge here coming down Oakland Trail. I mean, is there a line directly on that, or West Fort Collins?
We definitely do not feel that that's at all inevitable. I want to be very clear about that. If we did, we would be taking steps to notify folks and work up some very major plans at that point. But we do have Horsetooth Reservoir there as significant barrier and roadways and some rocky terrain and those types of things that are natural barriers for fire. So, it's a wildland fire, but so it's unpredictable, but that's not something that we're anticipating or pre-planning for in any way at this point. Yes?
Earlier you guys mentioned that it was the fire moving about a mile an hour. Is it still moving that quickly?
I'm not getting reports that it's moving that quickly at this point. What I'm actually hearing is that it's died down and moderated a little bit. So you can kind of see that just looking behind us here. The smoke is still moving at an angle, but kind of blowing back on itself and setting down a little bit. Often fires, as nightfall comes in, settle down too, though that wasn't the case on the Crystal Fire. That one went the opposite way, so that's not a hard and fast rule, but hopefully precipitation or humidity levels go up at night, winds sometimes calm, and that can help the fire too. But we'll see. We're still early in the day, the crews are out, and we'll be getting information. The fire's large, so it's hard to get a good perspective on it from one vantage point.
State Park or Ocean Mountain Park yet?
Has it reached that?
Yeah.
I know we evacuated those areas. I can't say if it's officially within those boundaries at this point. We'll get an updated map this evening and be able to look at that. We'll publish that on our various websites, etc.
You know, 36,000.
Well, one thing that's can happen with lightning strikes is it could have been a day before, it could have been 2 days before. We don't know. It's difficult. We could look at the weather at the time, but I can tell you on the Stewart Hole fire that was also lightning caused to the north here. I think that was a couple weeks ago. We've had a lot of fire activity here, so it's a kind of a blur, but that one was lightning caused. And anecdotally, I think our reports came in on Monday around midday on that one. And the residents in the area were saying that there was a lightning storm there on Sunday night, or afternoon, and so there probably was a lightning strike on that particular fire that occurred 12 hours or so before anybody noticed even smoke because it was a remote area. So you can get those kind of situations where a strike comes in, hits a tree, and smolders, and a little bit of wind kicks up, and it grows, and nobody's around, and next thing you know, you've got significant fire. On this one, when our emergency services personnel arrived on scene, it was originally reported at about 2 acres, which sounds very small in comparison to what we have now. And they all start small, obviously, but that's big enough that it's difficult to immediately suppress at that point. And the conditions were such that we've been talking about the dry material, the grass, the tinder, etc., that's down, and it grew very, very rapidly throughout the day to the point where we were in the hundreds of acres within just a few hours on Monday. I don't have that specific information. I can tell our guys jump right on those things. The goal is to put these fires out when they're very, very small. We actually, about a week or so ago, roughly in the same area, actually had a fire that was described as 30 feet by 30 feet. And again, they all start small. This one was smaller than that at one point, and our folks were able to get on that one and put it out in relatively short order. So that's typically the goal, but if something gets to a couple acres and the conditions are such that you've got winds, dry conditions, and dry vegetation, etc., it gets out of hand in a hurry. The winds didn't cooperate, the weather didn't cooperate, and the terrain's very challenging up here, so it grew very rapidly as a result. And yep.
It's still roughly 36,000 acres.
That's the only number I have at this point till we shoot the infrared shots tonight. So I don't know. There's likely been, just from what I'm seeing out there, some fire growth, at least on this side. We mentioned that the fire behind us here moved a little bit to the east. So I think those boundaries might have gotten a little bit bigger, but not anything like the growth that we've seen. I don't want to minimize, though, our concerns to the northeast there, where there's something of ahead of the fire. Hopefully the winds have reversed up there at this point, too. And again, we're working, as we speak, we've got crews up there and helicopters dropping water. So hopefully they can neutralize that as well and continue to make some good progress here. We'll have more updates tomorrow on containment, acreage, and all that. Tonight we'll discover how today went, and I think have an update on the person that was unaccounted for. We were able to get some of our personnel up there on scene and just waiting for that information to be compiled so that we can comfortably share it with the public.
When did you say you had that?
We were able to get some folks up on scene where the person who was unaccounted for lived, and we're just waiting to compile that information and be able to share that with the community and the media. But we should be able to do that this evening.